So, shalom to you both,
Shalom.
Rabbi Michael Friedman and Dr. Meir
Yeah,
Rosen.
beautiful.
Alechem.
Oh,
Good to meet up with you again
thank
after
you. Yes.
a hiatus.
Hmm.
For the record, today is Monday, Yom Sheni b'Shabbat, Kaf Heth b'Tishrei Tavshin Pei, the 28th day of the seventh month. Tavshin Pei is the year, according to our calendar, which corresponds to the 20th of October, 2025, according to the Gregorian calendar. So, gentlemen, please tell me what's on your mind.
Hmm.
Well, the biggest thing on my mind is the national surrender, which has seemed inevitable from the very beginning of this round of war. Um, so it's not shocking to me. It is not surprising, but it is still very painful. Um, and most of what's so painful about it is the lack of awareness and the celebration of the surrender that keeps what seems to be, from what we've discussed previously in my mind, and my heart, is so much intergenerational trauma that the pain is blinding. The national pain has blinded the Jewish nation to such a degree. And the most painful part, for me, um, probably would be the 916 Chayalim who died what seems to be for a surrender, not to mention the tens of thousands wounded and the millions of traumatized. But the most significant part is that there doesn't seem to be an off ramp from this collective insanity. There doesn't seem to be an awakening or an awareness, whatever I had hoped from the terrible massacre on Shmini Atzeret 2 years ago, now seems to not only have woken the nation up out of its slumber and insanity, but instead now has seemed to be reinforced by the public celebration of the surrender. To me, is the most painful part.
Allow me to respond briefly. I will say as follows. First of all, I entirely agree and identify with what you just said. I think any normal Jew must feel this sense of disillusion with the inane celebration of a non a non-peace treaty, a non-reality altogether, something which doesn't exist at all. Just for example, my wife informed me on Shmini Atzeret, just a week ago or whatever, that certain women that she spoke to in shul were elated by the end of the war, and isn't it wonderful? There's peace now. That was one heart-rending story, which we all would fully understand, of course, but that doesn't mean that um, the sentiments expressed by these people are correct in any way. One of the stories that my wife heard was that a certain there's a certain family where we live who lost their son-in-law during the course of this war. So their daughter is left with three children, a war widow. I think the oldest of which is 8 years old, a boy. And apparently, so I heard for the first time last week, this boy is traumatized by his father's death, which is not difficult to understand, and is very, very fearful and cannot really deal with the world at this point, and stays at home the whole time, doesn't go out, and So this woman, someone said, "Well, isn't it wonderful that now, for the first time in 2 years, she can say to her son, it's everything's if everything's better now, or everything is okay now, or look, or now you can relax, or something like that." Well, it's a heartrending story, and multiplied hundreds and hundreds of times. But it's of course entirely spurious. It's from the land of it's Alice in Wonderland. It's ridiculous. That's clear. I mean, let me ask you this question. Who amongst us was surprised to hear that yesterday morning Hamas attacked uh, our soldiers in the area of Rafah, I believe, in two separate incidents and killed
I
two
didn't
soldiers?
believe it because Hamas agreed to peace. So, and that's what Trump said. So it has to be, I mean, it must have been fake news
He must be
because
fake.
it must be fake news. Because they would never do, they would never violate the peace
No,
treaty.
obviously not.
Of course
Agreements in the Middle East are always upheld to the
not.
letter.
Right.
No,
Right.
goes without saying. So
Mhm.
obviously none of us were surprised. I would say that very few Israeli Jews were surprised, whatever their political uh, orientation, whatever their religious belief. I think very few Israelis were surprised by this news. I was obviously not surprised, and I predicted it, but I could not have told you for a fact that it would happen so quickly, within literally a matter of days. But again, nothing is surprising. It's only a question of when, not if. In other words, it was only a question of in which fashion precisely they will begin to abrogate the treaty and not the agreement, whatever you want to call it, and when will they begin to attack us? Look, it's only a matter of time. Again, how long? Can't say. Impossible to know. It could be days, could be weeks, could be months, but unlikely to be more than that until they begin re, renew their uh, missile attacks against Israel, for example. How far off can that be? There was already such a missile attack against Ashdod, I believe, about 10 days ago. That was even before the agreement was signed. Nothing has changed, of course. So, there are a lot of people living in La La Land, quite literally. Why is that? Yeah, I think it has to do with what you said, Rabbi Michael, about trauma, and I would say trauma is part of it, but I would say it's and mainly even more than any kind of trauma, whether it's personal or multi-generational, it has to do with an unwillingness. Some might say an inability, but I would say it's more of an unwillingness to look at reality in the face. Let me tell you a story. As opposed to many Hasidic stories, this is a true story. And I know it's true. I know it's true because it happened to me.
Mm.
If we go back exactly, or just a little bit over 40 years, so we're talking Tolshin, Mem Daled, Mem Hey, Mem, well, in other words, 1984, 85, 86. That was when, it's not when the phenomenon of the Fakistinians lobbing rocks at motorists in different parts of the country. That's not when it began. That began already in the late 70s. I remember very well.
Hmm.
And I also remember how the uh, the legal junta in this country, how they dealt with that. And we can speak about that also. I think it's relevant. But it intensified. It became commonplace. It became a daily occurrence in the mid 80s. I remember this very well. I was at that time a relatively young avrech in Yeshivat Merkaz Harav in Yerushalayim, and having reached the conclusion that essentially all yeshivot have no idea how to either learn or teach Torah. I had already for some time, some years before that, within less than a year of arriving in Merkaz Harav Yeshiva, I ceased going to any shiurim except for one particular shiur in the mornings, which we can discuss another time. And I studied myself, and then I found another like-minded individual, and we became a Hebrufa, and we learned together for 10 years. That's what happened. So this Hebrufa of mine and myself, we began to ask ourselves a simple question, is there something wrong with us, or is there something wrong with everybody else here in this yeshiva? Because we would listen to the news, and that in those days it was the radio, and every hour, and Israelis for decades and upon decades have had this traumatic condition of having to listen to the news every hour on the hour, because who knows what's happened in the past hour or the past 5 minutes. But I wouldn't listen to the news every hour, but I would listen to the news on the radio a few times a day. And you would hear on every single news bulletin at 10 a.m. or 12 p.m., or it doesn't matter what time of day it was, rocks were thrown at Jewish motorists in this place here. Either someone was injured, or someone was killed, or someone was not. And the same thing happened over here and over there. It was becoming not just a daily occurrence; it was becoming something that occurred every day, many times every day. All right, several times every day, and no one was speaking about it. It didn't seem. It was like water slipping off a well-treated raincoat. It just sort of slid off. No one would notice. No one spoke about it. It was a non-issue. And my Chevrolet Hanai, his name is Harav Elitzur Segar. We said to ourselves, maybe people just don't listen to the news as much as we do. Maybe. And again, we weren't listening to the news all day, every day, all the time, but we did listen a few times a day, and we heard what was going on, and it was, in our eyes, something that normal people would not accept. And yet no one seemed to talk about it. So we decided to do the following. We decided, both of us, whenever we listened to the news, we would jot down the attacks that were related by the newsreader, whatever it was. And we both did this for a time, for a few weeks. Around that time, by the way, there was a relatively, at that time, new phenomenon of knife stabbing attacks in different parts of the country. In Yerushalayim, I remember all over the place. It also began to become the new national Fakistinian sport. And so we noted all these things, and we showed it to some people in the yeshiva. We just, during the course of the day in yeshiva, we just showed people these lists that we had produced. We even typed them up, and we showed them. What do you say? People just shrugged. That was it. They just shrugged, as if, okay, so what? What's the big deal? Or why are you telling me this? As if it was not relevant to them. We were shocked on the one hand, but quickly came to the understanding that there's something wrong with with Israelis in general, and even the people in our yeshiva. There's something very wrong with them. And then we began to think of how it might be possible to publish this information, so that more people will become aware of the extent of these phenomena. Eventually, the only group, interestingly, instructively, the only group that was willing to publish this information was Kach, Tnuat Kach, in those days, headed by Rav Meir Kahana, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, Hashem Yikom Damo, who was assassinated in the first Al-Qaeda orchestrated attack in the United States. This was in Tawshi Nun Aleph, I believe, 1991, the Minyan. It was some years later, in other words. At this point in time, Rav Kahana was actually in the Knesset. There was a one-man faction in the Knesset. That's one of the reasons they changed the law, so there could be no such thing as a one-seat party. That you had to have at least 4. That's one of the reasons they changed that law. Then, of course, they changed, and then they decided to do away with him, legally execute him, so to speak, politically execute him, and remove him from the political game in Israel. I'm not suggesting, by the way, as righteous as Rav Kahana was and as correct most of his statements were, I'm not suggesting he was an efficient or very savvy politician. He wasn't. I know. I spoke to him. I knew him. And I can tell you more about that also. But the fact is, the Kach organization, which was situated on Rehov Agrippas in Yerushalayim, we went there with our lists that we had compiled over some time. We showed to the general secretary of the organization, the guy who actually ran the show, and he said, "Well, look, we have this information. We think people need to see it. Are you willing to publish it?" He took a look, and he said, "Yes, we'll add it to our Parshat Shavua sheet." They were one of the earlier groups to have a Parshat Shavua sheet. In those days, there was the strange people who believe in the religion which is reminiscent of Judaism, known as Chabad, and there was Mafdal, and there was Kach, and maybe there was a few others. There weren't that many Parshat Shavua sheets in those days as there are now. Now you have shuls today which have an entire racks on the wall full of these sheets, just to make sure that no one will actually listen to the Haftarah, so that people will have something to read. So they began to print it, and for some time they did. I don't recall for how long. I think maybe many months or a year, something like that. And they also saw that no one took note, no one mentioned, no one seemed to do anything with this information. Eventually they gave up, and I can understand that also. But they were willing to at least to go for it, try it, and they did. So I'm relating all this to you to tell you that Jews in general, and Israeli Jews in particular, are extremely adept at denying reality. What else can I say? So the same is true now. So there are many Jews who wanted to celebrate and thought this was a great breakthrough and what have you. Of course, total nonsense. Only a true fool could believe such a thing, or a person suffering from some kind of psychotic condition, maybe not recognized as such, but in practice, that's what we're discussing. People who can simply somehow detach themselves from reality. This is what the Israeli peace movement is all about, after all, for going back many, many decades. As we've discussed before, it's just a phenomenon of immature, incredibly stupid people behaving like little children, stamping their feet, having a tantrum. We want peace now. Shalom achshav, which is reminiscent, of course, of Mashiach now. Same kind of ridiculous behavior and notion. And that's it. That's what we want. And so, and whatever it takes. So at any price. So we'll do this. We'll give this away. We'll agree to any demand in order to achieve this goal. Well, have we achieved any of those goals? Clearly not, for obvious reasons. The reason is extremely simple. And in case someone listening is not aware of the reason, I will state it simply and plainly in few words. We are talking about a religious war. It has always been a religious war. It's Islam against us, but not just against us, against the entire world. But we're the first on the list. And these people are completely dedicated to their fanatical, bloodthirsty Islamo-Nazi ideology, and nothing will deter them or change their course. Nothing. I mean, we see, look at the destruction in Gaza. They haven't changed their mind.
Is it safe to say, Rob, that Christianity is also trying to usurp the power of Klal Yisrael? They also seem to be trying to take. It's not just Islam. It seems that it's Islam, Christianity. Everybody's trying to come to Eretz Yisrael, but not so much to conquer it, but to perhaps get the brachos from Yaakov Avinu, to take them back. I don't. There just seems to be I mean, it's not just Islam. Islam is going to probably be more successful because of the way they conduct themselves. but it just seems that Esav is also on the warpath to basically to take over Gaza, to take over. I mean, is that possible also? Everybody's trying to get the crown of the king.
Well, we all know that the source of these other two religions is the Torah, is Judaism.
Of course.
Christianity claims that, at least this has always been the mainstream position of the Christian world, that we are the new chosen people because we accepted the Messiah, and they didn't. And the same kind of claim, not precisely identical, but a similar claim is made by the Muslims, that we have the true word of God, which supersedes all previous iterations thereof. And on top of that, we are required by our religion to impose it on the rest of the world, not just the Jews, everybody. Now, what's happened in the meantime, we've had two parallel but opposite developments. And on the one hand, Islam has risen and Christianity has dissipated. In other words, in Western Europe today, there's next to no Christianity. The churches are empty. There is a small, apparently, this may be the beginning of a kind of snapback phenomenon. There is a certain statistical rise in the number of younger people going to churches in places like the UK. I'm aware of this fact, but it's still not a mainstream phenomenon. Not by any means. In general, Christianity has basically run itself out, run its race in much of Europe. In Eastern Europe, it's a little bit different. In parts of Central Europe as well, like Hungary, and then you have Poland and other countries where the connection to Christianity continues to be significant. And these countries, if the rest of Europe falls, which is quite possible, very possible, at least Western Europe falls to Islam, then these countries will be the new Byzantium. In other words, when the Roman Empire fell, Byzantium in Constantinople, Turkey, was the center of the Christian world for another 1,000 years until the Ottoman Turks, Muslims, conquered Turkey, Constantinople, and renamed it Istanbul. So they will be the new Byzantium. They will be the new frontier of Tanakh. Loosely, in loose terms, we can describe it as Tanakh-based civilization, because Christianity accepts the Tanakh, at least in theory, whereas Islam explicitly rejects the Tanakh. It says it's a forgery. And the Quran is the true Torah, which was always the real McCoy, and the Jews forged this other book instead, but we have the real version, and that's the Quran. So they don't even accept in theory the written word, the Tanakh, whereas Christianity in theory does, and clearly Christianity was heavily influenced by the Tanakh in many ways. So if there is a resurgence in Christian belief and Christian practice, this will act as some kind of antidote to the rise of Islamo-Nazism. But so we have, as I said, these two movements: the Islam on the rise, Christianity on the decline, and until and unless the Christian world chooses to stand and fight, they will be overrun by the Islamic hordes, the Islamo-Nazi hordes. And that's the other thing about Islam. has become much more, some would say radical, I would say authentic. In other words, returning to its roots.
Mhm.
In other words, what they want to do is what they see described in the Quran and in the Hadith, in other words, in the traditions. They want to emulate their false prophet Muhammad, and that's what. And they're open about wanting to do this. It was something which they didn't speak about 100 years ago, 150 years ago, but now they're very explicit about it. That's where the world is right now. As for Israel, many Israelis have if you go back decades even, particularly in the wake of the Six-Day War, that's when the Israeli left really began to take off and form itself into what we see today over time. The Israeli left, which was very, very insidiously and very successfully was able to co-opt and or maintain their control of all the almost all the essential power centers, the foci of power in the country. In other words, the media, academia, the so-called legal system. So what we have today in Israel is not a democracy at all. We have a juristocracy. We have a system run by a small clique of judges who answer to no one and do as they please. And we know this. This is not new. If you don't believe me, then believe former president of Israel, Ruvi Rivlin, who said this explicitly in an interview in Haaretz newspaper in 2003, the Minyanam, and I have it on my computer, in which he says that he speaks about the what are his words exactly? He says something like he describes the legal um, establishment as a junta mishpatit. I think that's the term he uses, a judicial junta. In other words, they're a criminal syndicate using the power of the law for their own purposes of power and politics and self enrichment. That's what he said about them, because that's when they began persecuting him. So he actually came out and said that. And probably the only intelligent thing he said in his entire career as president, but that's what he said. Anyway, please respond.
Mayor, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
The only thing that I can really think of is I blame I have to say I blame rabbis, because I've always been taught, and I know I mentioned this, I mentioned this last time, that there's going to be miracles in the end. Of like I think Klal Yisrael is waiting for miracles because we're stuck. We just don't know what to do. And I've been fed how there's going to be open miracles, and I think we're just all waiting for that. And I'm not surprised when you mentioned, Rav, when you were passing this around about all the stabbings and all the extracurricular activities of our cousins and what they do to Klal Yisrael. People don't know what to do. It's just we're stuck. I think that's also part of the trauma. I'm not sure it's fully trauma, right? Like the Rav said, but it's we're just stuck. What's can be done? What we have no power. Nobody listens to the average person. I mean, the government is I mean, they don't even pretend to care about the citizens. In America, they pretend, but here they don't even pretend. Um, all they know how to do is raise taxes. I mean, what we're waiting for miracles, and I think this has been a nonstop beaten into us. There's going to be miracles, open miracles. Hashem is going to save us, and which was the Rav said there hasn't been open miracles since the time of Yehoshua, right? Is that I believe?
I know I didn't
Oh,
say that exactly. I said
oh,
that
mhm,
in terms of uh, fighting a war against the enemy,
mhm,
we have not experienced uh,
mhm.
since Yoshua bin Nun, we have not
Oh,
experienced open miracles, explicit, open supernatural events as part of a war against their enemies.
Relatives in America, as we all do. And I really believe that, from people in America are waiting for miracle. They think the Rebbeinu Shalom is going to call them up. Okay, it's time to go. It's time to come to Israel. They don't realize. And I think again, I blame the rabbis that what we were taught. It seems to not be true. I mean, that's why I think they're so stunned at all the anti-Semitism. Like, hey, wait a minute, this is not supposed to happen. Like, this is the final redemption. Hashem is gonna, send us emails, or I guess. I don't know what they were thinking. But,
I experience what you experience.
Mhm.
I think it's magical thinking, and it's
Right.
been reinforced by religious doctrine,
Right.
which, when you examine the sources and our logical experience of reality,
Mhm.
it's not a proof. There's no raya. They don't
Mhm.
have conclusive proof that it's going to be miraculous.
Mhm.
We may not have conclusive proof either that it won't be miraculous, but I think the preponderance of evidence is
Mhm.
much more along the natural
Mhm.
means, as Rav Bar-Hayim is saying.
Right. And then that's not magical thinking then. That's what do you mean it's based on Tanakh, based on a Medrash, it's based on Torah. It's not from it's they have real sources, and we're not allowed to argue with Chazal, right? I think that's something that the Rav can speak to very much. We can't argue. We're not allowed to that. It just silences us. We're not allowed to say anything against Chazal. He's a Rishon, he's a Tana, and so from all sides, everyone is handcuffed and nobody could do anything. And that's why I a big part of, I believe, why we're in this mess.
I agree with you, and I think that the emotional piece, which is how we started, was the other side of the same coin, sort of the Jew's inability to deal with painful realities. You're
Mhm.
describing the manifestation of that in the observant world. In the observant Jewish world, I think the inability to recognize the reality for what it is has given themselves permission, maybe unintentionally, unwittingly, they've given themselves permission to believe in the most fantastical idea and then retroactively justify it or try to justify it through the Torah
Mhm.
sources.
Right. Of which there are many. I mean, the Chumash is full of open Nisim and Gulas Mitzrayim. I mean, so it's not completely unfounded. It's just misguided, perhaps.
Yes, but when I heard, for example, Harav Yitzchak Yosef, former Rishon LeZion, Rav Rashi Sfaradi of this country, son of Rav Ovadia Yosef, both of whom, I will be the first to admit, were very serious Talmidei Chachamim, very knowledgeable in certain, I stress, areas of Torah, not all, and also responsible for some terrible errors, which we can discuss and we probably should discuss. But the first error is this, the following. This is an interview with Rav Yitzchak Yosef from perhaps 6 months ago, which I heard, in which he was discussing the hot topic in the Haredi world, Giyus B'nai Yeshivot, and the words whether yeshiva students should serve in the military, yes or no. And he, of course, is totally opposed because, like all these Sfaradi Chachamim, they've all become entirely Meshuknazim, entirely Ashkenazi in their thinking, in their ideology. And these people grew up either in the yeshivot of the Litaim or under the influence of such people. And so they adopted these same approaches and ideas, and that's the underpinning of their entire world view. So what did he say, Rabbi Yitzhak Yosef? He said we need to have as many people studying yeshiva as possible. In fact, you need to have one-on-one. In other words, for every soldier, you need to have a Bahur Yeshiva studying Torah the whole time. He based this on a certain midrash, and it's not what the midrash says, but he based it on a certain midrash. The midrash, he made it out that the midrash in Sefer Bamidbar to do with Mehemeth Midyan states that it's only one opinion in the midrash, and there's no reason, and it's not a halachic statement. It's not brought in any halachic work. but the one opinion there, whether it's Rabbi Yishmael or Rabbi Akiva, is also not clear because there's two different readings. But anyhow, the point is that according to one view there, for each soldier that went out to battle, and there were 12,000 such soldiers, 1,000 from each tribe against Midian, they set aside one person, 1-to-1 ratio, to daven, to pray for the success of Am Yisrael. Doesn't say anything about studying Torah. Doesn't, and this was a specific event, a one-time event. It doesn't say that you always have to. When you have a standing army of 300,000 soldiers, for example, you need to have 300,000 Talmidei Yeshivot. That's not what it says, and it doesn't say anything about Torah. It says tefillah. But that's how they read it. That's what they got, and therefore, if for every soldier we need to have a Bachur Yeshiva, and this will guarantee our success. And if we do so, we will there will be no soldiers will be killed, and no soldiers will be injured. And he said, in the time of David HaMelech, there were many wars, but so no one was killed and no one was injured. So he said. When I heard this, I immediately, struck my forehead in amazement, and I said to myself, I don't know where this person's coming from. There's something he's lost it altogether. All you need to do, first of all, is look in the Tanakh. It's not just the Tanakh. I'll show you can bring other sources, but one source is in Sefer Shemuel. Perhaps I'll bring it up on the screen. This is in Sefer Shemuel Beth, Perek Yud Aleph. All right, so we're looking here at Sefer Shmuel Beth, Perek Yud Aleph, Pasuk Yod Dalet. Now, we all know the unfortunate story of David HaMelech, who unfortunately sinned grievously with regards to Bathsheba. He coveted another man's wife. And he wanted to do away with Uriah, this woman's husband, Uriah Hittite. So it says in Pasuk Yud Dalet over here, I mark it out, you should be able to see it. ויהי בבוקר, ויכתוב דוד ספר על יואב, וישלח ביד Uriah. He sent a letter with Uriah, who had come home for a furlough, a break from the fighting. They were busy fighting. The army was busy. It was involved in warfare. And Uriah was apparently an officer or something like that, and a good soldier. And David wanted to do away with him. So what did he do? He wrote to Yoav, who was the Ramatkal, the chief of staff, Havu eth Uriah el mul pnei hamilchama ahazaka. Be sure to place Uriah where the battle is hardest and most hotly contested, most dangerous. And then you all of a sudden will retreat, leave him as it were by himself in the open, and he will be struck and he will die. That was the plan, and that's what happened. Read on. Tet Zayin. ויהי בשמור יואב אל העיר, ויתן את אוריה אל המקום אשר ידע, כי אנשי העיר שם. That's exactly what he did. They were surrounding, besieging a city of the enemy, and he placed Uriah exactly at that spot where he knew the opposition would be the greatest. And some of these people in the city with whom they were engaged in battle broke out of the city to fight the Jews who were surrounding them. And of the soldiers of the Jewish army of David HaMelech, a certain number were killed in this skirmish. It says, Vayipol min ha'am me'avdeh David. There's no ambiguity. There's nothing unclear about what those words mean. It means that some of the Jewish soldiers in the army headed by Yoav, in which Uriah was a soldier or an officer, there was a skirmish with the enemy, and some of them died. Vayamoth gam Uriah Hittite, and one of them was Uriah. So let me ask you now, in the time of David HaMelech, did soldiers die in battle sometimes, perhaps frequently? Tell me, what do you think? It says clearly that it doesn't say how many, but some soldiers died, and one of them was Uriah. He wasn't alone either. And one can assume that where you have casualties, when people are killed, you also have those who are injured. So for someone to claim in the time of David HaMelech, there were no soldiers killed or injured in battle. This is a delusional statement from a person who's living in some kind of parallel universe, not in the real world.
I find it just, how is it possible that someone could make such an error? It's black and white. It says clearly Gam, Uriah, also Mashma. There's other. I don't understand how such an error could be made.
There's also a midrash in Midrash Tehillim, in which it says there explicitly, all the thousands of Jews who died during the Milhamot of David HaMelech died because they didn't demand the binyan of Beit HaMikdash. Okay, that's also a furash. But someone might say, well, that's Divrei Agadah, it's a midrash, I don't know, you can't bring it as a... Okay, fine. So that's why I quoted first from Shemuel. You can't really explain that away. It's quite plain, it's obvious. Wow. Even in those days, there were not miracles of the sort that would result in miraculous, casualty-free battles and wars. There was no such thing. So what are we talking about? As you say, we're talking about it's delusional Torah. It's not Torah. Now, I know what some people will say, and I will say something which may shock you also. I know that there are many people self-described as Haredim, some Rabbanim, who will say the current situation is not a Milhamet Mitzvah. It's not considered a Milhamet Mitzvah, and therefore the soldiers, the yeshiva students do not have to go to the army. That's a very strange statement. I would disagree with that statement. But if you ask them why they think so, they might tell you, well, there's no Jewish king, which is true, which is another way of saying that we do not view the authorities as legitimate. We do not believe in anything that they do. We do not believe in their shikul da'ath, their ability to consider the situation, whatever it might be, correctly, assess the situation, and determine how to proceed and what to do and when to go to war and in what manner to prosecute that war. And here I would have to agree with them. I think the authorities, the current regime in this country, according to the Torah, is illegitimate. It's not. It's the Dati Le'umi that the Haredim refer to as the Hadalim, with fairly good reason, I would say. Also, Dalim meaning people who are, shall we say, very poor in terms of Torah. To some large extent, that there is truth in that statement. I would also say the same is true about the Haredim, but okay, in a different sense. But okay, I can say whatever I like, of course, because I do not. First of all, obviously, I'm a delusional person myself, and I'm not normal, and I'm strange, and I'm very different, and I don't fit into anyone's box, and therefore I don't owe anything to anybody, and therefore I can speak my mind and what I believe to be the truth. It's up to other people to decide whether I'm speaking truth or something else. But I am not obligated. I'm not duty bound to fall in line with this or that ideology or claim. On the one hand, this is clearly Milhamet Mitzvah, but it's also clearly not being prosecuted. We're not being led by the right people, and these people obviously see things in a manner which is completely skewed and off target and wrong in every possible sense. So if a Haredi person says to me, I'm not going to send my son to fight in a war where the decisions are being made by the juristocracy and these left-wing Kapla Nukhbot generals, etc., and the Matkal, the general staff of the army to this day is much the same as it was 2 years ago. And this current chief of staff is more or less as much a disaster as the previous one, and that was clear from the outset also. All he had to do was read a couple of articles that he himself wrote some years ago when he was still in uniform, because he had gone through the educational brainwashing campaign of the Wexner Institute and what have you, and you can read what the guy said, and it was a disaster waiting to happen, which raises the question why Defense Minister Katz thought he was the right person for the job. That I cannot answer, but I don't have the answers for everything. But that's the fact. So if a Haredi Rav says to me, look, you're right, it's a Mechamet, if he says it's not a Mechamet Miswa because we haven't got a king, well, there is no clear authoritative halachic statement or source which would enable one to claim that if there's no properly constituted Jewish government, then there cannot be, by definition, a Mechamet Miswa. There is no such source for that. I could, for example, respond with a question: was the armed rebellion against the Greco-Syrians by the Hashmonaim 2,200 plus years ago, was that a Mehemet Miswa or not? I think a reasonable person would say most definitely was. It was also a Mehemet Miswa. That is to say, for those who are not familiar with the term, a Mehemet Miswa is where it is a religious Torah-based duty to go to war against the enemy, against this or that group or nation who are endangering the Jewish people. So that's at least one of the definitions of a Mehemet Miswa. So I would say yes, definitely the Hashmonaim were engaged in Mehemet Miswa. Was there a properly constituted Jewish government at that time? Absolutely not. The country was being ruled by the Greco-Syrian occupation, who were the descendants of the generals of Alexander the Great. And they were being assisted very enthusiastically by many Mithyawanim, many Hellenists, Jewish Hellenists, who turned their back on the Jewish people and joined forces with the Jewish people's oppressors, exactly as we see today. Nothing new. There is nothing new under the sun. And Hadash Tahat Hashemesh. So I think that's a ridiculous claim. On the other hand, if the same Haredi Rav says to me, all right, I agree, I accept, it's a Mehemet Miswa, technically, even in reality. But how can you send your son to war where these kinds of people are going to make the decisions which affect whether he lives or dies or is injured or the general outcome of the war? And I unfortunately must admit, I think there is some truth and some validity in that claim. That proves that I'm not a Dati Lomi. That proves I'm not a religious Zionist, because I think there is validity in that claim. On the other hand, I won't deny, one cannot deny, that if everyone said that and no one was willing to go to the army, then our situation would be dire indeed, if not more than dire. We would simply not be here. But there is truth in that claim.
That does make a lot of sense, and I've heard this from soldiers. Some of them they have to go back perhaps, but they don't want to because they see chaos. They don't see a military that is actually committed to doing what a military is supposed to do, which is shockingly win a war.
By all means. And that and victory over the enemy, of the Jewish people's enemies, trumps all other considerations, including, for example, hostages. But if you have no appreciation of the concept of the Jewish people as a nation, and you only can see the individual, and for many of these people, they don't even see a Jewish individual. They just see an individual, a human being. So it doesn't matter if it's a person from Timbuktu or an Eskimo tribe in Canada or northern Canada or someone from New Zealand or a Jew from Beersheba. It makes no difference. It's just a human being to them. They don't just distinguish between Jew and non-Jew, which the Torah most certainly does. That may not be politically correct, and that's okay because I don't mind not being politically correct. Some people have a problem with that, so they become Reform rabbis or conservative rabbis or modern Orthodox rabbis, and some of them even set up a yeshiva in Gush Etzion called Har Etzion. You have such people. I know that, and these are the kinds of views that they disseminate. But the Torah doesn't look at the world that way. So, and that's clear. I'm not going to give a share on this now, but that is clear. So if you only see the individual, then the purpose of the war is to free hostages and not to win, not to destroy the enemy. And that's exactly what we see. That explains what the current outcome. I also am willing to admit that we're not at the end of this current war. I never thought we were. I never expected Netanyahu to produce a different result from them, with which we have been presented at the moment. But what happens is not only up to us, it's also up to our enemies and up to Trump and up to this and that and other considerations. So I cannot predict what tomorrow will bring. But I know that we haven't got our eye on the ball. We do not know towards what we are supposed to be moving. What is the goal? What is the aim? And what means are legitimate and necessary in order to achieve that aim? So the army's hands are tied by the juristocracy, by the legal junta, and the heads of the army themselves believe in this stuff. And I think even Netanyahu believes in all of these things. For instance, the obvious thing to do immediately after the beginning of this war was simply to lay siege to Gaza. No electricity, no water, no fuel, no food. And until you surrender and you hand over the hostages, until you hand over you disarm, until we will enter the territory and demilitarize it and rule it. And as you know, what I think, we should have engaged in a policy which can be summed up in 3 words: kibush, gerush, התיישבות.
Yes.
Conquer, expel, and rebuild and create once again Jewish settlement in that part of Eretz Yisrael, which is simply the so-called Gaza Strip is just the beachfront territory, the property of the Negev. It's just the part of the Negev which abuts onto the Mediterranean Sea. It's not a separate territory. It never has been. It's always been part of Eretz Yisrael. But if that is not your aim and you're not willing to besiege your enemy, well then, before you begin, you've lost. Lost in terms of looking at the big picture. Because as long as Hamas exists in any shape, way, or form, they consider, with a large degree of justification, they consider it to be their victory, as long as they still exist. They don't care about how many buildings you turned into rubble. That's not meaningful. They, in fact, are quite pleased. Then they have a tremendous, media campaign, and it just fuels their lies, etc. And they know there are a lot of people who will buy that kind of propaganda, and so it's the last thing that concerns them.
And I just saw recently for the prime minister, he's going to be running for re-election in his party, and he's expecting to win a resounding victory, probably.
Yes.
Uncontested, probably as well, right? How?
Yes, I believe that's correct. Yes.
I mean, how?
Because most, it's hard to say, but many Israelis think that he is the best thing since sliced bread. He's wonderful. Now, I will admit that Netanyahu surprised me positively when he chose to attack Iran finally, after having spoken about it for 30 years. And it should have been done a long time before. And I know for a fact it was about to happen about 18 years ago or something like that. I know this for a fact. But it was called off at the last moment. So I was positively surprised by that. I was positively surprised, as were some other people, by the Beeper campaign, which and our success in destroying Hezbollah's arsenal of rockets and missiles, which has not much to do with Netanyahu in terms of the intelligence required and the planning. They were planning that for 20 years, right? Didn't just happen because someone came up with a brilliant idea a week before. It was in the planning for 20 years. But Netanyahu had to take the decision to actually go ahead with it. And that's true. And he has to be given credit for that. And I give him credit for that.
I too was surprised, pleasantly surprised. I'm told that there was another opportunity shortly before the beeper explosion to significantly wound a great number more of Hezbollah fighters, which would have required in the realm of more tens of thousands, but it would have included non-combatants or supposedly non-combatants in the vicinities as opposed to the extraordinarily laser-focused beeper explosion on the persons of the terrorists themselves. And I'm told due to his and his ilk, their direct intervention, the scope of the attack became much, much more limited.
Yes, I believe that is correct. And obviously, I would have chosen the former option. But
Mhm.
the fact is, he nevertheless did take certain decisions and attacking Iran, as we said, and Hezbollah. And I have no doubt also that the prosecution of this war in Gaza would have been even worse than it has been were anyone else in power, anyone else likely to be in power in the current political constellation, then rather than Netanyahu. I admit that, that's true. But
So he's the best. Would you say he's the best of what there is?
he's the best of a very bad bunch, yes.
Right. Okay. Fine. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yes.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
And he cannot be the true leader of the Jewish people to lead us into the light. He is not such a person. He will not be such a person. But compared to non-entities and worse than that, like Lapid or Gantz or Yair Golan or Bennett, um, he's it's unfortunate that we have to admit this, but it's a fact. He's preferable. But turning very, very limited uh, and partial success and all kinds of prevarications and incorrect policies into a virtue, that's something else. Many Israelis are convinced that he's done everything properly and correctly, and or most things anyway, and he's definitely the best candidate for the job to continue as prime minister. That's what he obviously intends. And therefore, I know that we will continue to find ourselves in these kinds of situations. Not as bad as if someone like Bennett or Lapid were in power, but not where we need to be by any means also. All it took for, let me remind you, all it took for Bennett and Lapid, I think technically it was Lapid who was in power over 3 years ago in the summer of Tol Shin Pebeth, 2022, the Minyanim. All it took for Lapid to hand over sovereign territory, Israeli territory in the Mediterranean Sea and gas fields to Lebanon, that is to say to Hezbollah, which is to say to Iran, all it took was to fly two drones, unarmed drones, past some gas installation in the sea as a threat. And Lapid immediately agreed to hand everything over. That's the kind of leadership that Lapid provided. And if you recall, two years ago, on Hol HaMoed Sukkot in my sukkah. This is recorded. It's on YouTube. I said in the wake of that capitulation, I said it's not possible that we are not heading for war, because when you show the enemy how weak and fearful and irresolute you are, why wouldn't they continue? Why wouldn't they press harder? And that's exactly what we saw. That was exactly 2 years um, before the war broke out. And I said the same thing exactly 1 year before the war, also in my sukkah, also recorded in the same setting, Hol HaMoed Sukkot, 1 year before. I said, we're heading for war, no question, because of the way we are conducting ourselves vis-a-vis our enemies. And there were other occasions when I said the same thing. So to me, none of this is surprising.
I also saw a recording of the Rav giving that same warning just a few weeks before that Shmini Atzeret massacre.
It was actually like a couple of months, I think.
Couple of months.
Yeah, it was in Modi'in. We had a gathering with some of my Talmidim in Modi'in, and yes, I remember I spoke. I was standing in their garden, if I recall correctly, and you can see what I said there. I said war is imminent. Yeah.
And viewers can see it online in
Yeah,
August. It was in August and very early October
yeah,
was
something like that. July, August, I think. Yeah, let me know. Yeah.
there's one of the freed hostages who we all rejoice. It goes without saying, we're all tremendously thankful and we rejoice at their reunion and their liberation from the terrible torturous conditions. Not at all a contradiction to anything that's been said.
Oh, of course not.
One of them, just yesterday, it was written that in a conversation, the couple had, she or he wrote, and this is printed, "We have won our personal war,"
Yes.
which is exactly what we've been discussing. When one doesn't have a concept of a nation, one can manipulate the nation, maybe with good intentions, but bend and twist the heartstrings of a merciful Jewish nation in order to do the most illogical and ultimately cruel behaviors inflicted upon so many others, as we've said. And even according to, even discounting the whole notion of prioritizing the individual over the nation, it seems that even prioritizing individuals over individuals, um, one could not justify such a surrender deal for all of the individuals who have been needlessly killed, harmed, wounded, traumatized, and destroyed, even in the worldview of individuals, not including a calculation of a Jewish nation or the effects on the international community and the world if we allow Islamo-Nazis to take over. Even in an individual calculation, it doesn't seem to be even close.
No, it's not close. But they were in fact they did not. These people, the Kaplan Nuchbot, these extreme left-wing non-Jewish Jews, they were of the opinion, as they still are, that we shouldn't have been fighting all this time, even not to release hostages. We should have just simply capitulated much earlier and made and agreed to even worse terms in order to release the hostages, but not by fighting. Fighting is taboo. There's no room for that. That's, of course, what led to the Second World War, because the First World War was such uh, a disaster for humanity, which it was, that anything is preferable. So they thought. They just didn't think of one possible outcome, and that is you're going to end up with another world war much worse than the first one. That didn't occur to them. But that's why the Chamberlain and the French and all the rest of them, the Americans, they're all interested in appeasing Hitler and Mussolini and making all kinds of deals and handing over Czechoslovakia. We know the history. Why was this? Why was this? Because they wanted to avoid another mass slaughter in Europe, but they didn't avoid it.
It doesn't appear as if we're reliving that.
Absolutely, no question. Exactly the same processes are at play.
I have to ask, it's a mental health question. Rav, how do you stay sane? I mean, I don't know how else. Forgive my directness and my
That's
candidness,
a good question.
but I just
Some people would tell you
it's
that your question is out of place because I'm clearly not
oh,
sane.
oh then that's I just it's a mess. It's a mess, and anyone with sanity is not allowed into the orchestra, and the I mean they're just no one is. It just makes no sense. It's wherever we look, it's just insanity.
Yes, you are correct. How I personally stay sane
Yeah.
is a very valid question because I truly have felt, I would say for the past 40 years easily, that I am living in a lunatic asylum. No, really, that's what
Yes, I know. That's why I'm laughing, because I
yeah,
know you're
yeah.
absolutely serious.
And you feel the same
Right.
way.
Of
You feel
course.
the same thing.
Of course. Of
And
course.
as any normal person should
Mhm.
and would. Um,
Right.
yeah,
I think it's gotten to a head at the last 2 years, because literally, if 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 something doesn't change, and I'm still hoping for miracles from the Ribono Shel Olam, Klal Yisrael is going to cease to exist in Teva. We're not going to survive in Teva. It's impossible.
according to the laws of nature only, we
Right.
would not be here.
Right. And we're above the
Going
laws
back
of
a long
nature.
time.
Right. Of course. But even
Uh,
now, so when it's so obvious and clear, the whole world, the entire world is we're starving the Gazans, the innocent people, where they have guns in their basement ready to. I mean, the whole world is against us, no matter what we do.
yeah,
Both ways.
this is absolutely true. If it were the case that you saw the world up in arms about all the poor Gazans executed summarily by Hamas over the past uh, 10 days, some
I
of
didn't hear
which
anything about that.
well, but it's all
Of course.
it's all videoed and filmed, and
No,
it's for anyone to see if they wish to
but
hear.
but
If
nobody
you
wishes to hear it. That's it.
So clearly, in other words, if you were to hear that the same kind of
Right.
response, mass demonstrations and marches and pro pro Fakistinian marches, now bewailing the killing of these poor Fakistinian Gazans by their brethren, then at least they could claim that we are concerned about human life,
Mhm.
humanitarianism, etc. But we all see that this is never an issue. Right now in Sudan, there's a war between Muslims and Christians. In other places, Nigeria, all kinds of things you don't hear about. How many wars are there in the world right now? Do you know? At this moment, there are 60 armed conflicts. 60 armed conflicts in 90 areas of the world. Those are the figures right now. You don't hear about any of them. So,
Mhm.
but you hear about what goes on in Gaza for some reason.
Mhm. Mhm.
When we're talking about a population which is almost to a man Islamo-Nazi in ideology and in practice, in other words, when they get the chance, we all know that there were many supposedly civilians, that is to say, unarmed, not with Kalashnikovs anyhow. Maybe they were armed with axes and kitchen knives, etc., who invaded our country 2 years ago, together with the well organized, relatively well armed Hamas fighters. So that's who they are. We know this, and you would think that reasonable, moral people with a sense for the humane and the gentle would be opposed to these people, but they're not. So it's clearly rooted in anti-Semitism. There's no other way to explain what we all see. How does one stay sane? Well, the first thing is to truly internalize the fact that you in fact are sane, and it's the others who are not sane. That's the first thing. How's a person going to remain normal inside a lunatic asylum? Only by telling himself, I am sane and they are the lunatics, not the other way around.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter if there are more lunatics than sane people in the asylum. The reality still is that the lunatics are the lunatics and the sane are the sane. That's number one. Number two, and I personally am able to tell myself that that mantra once every day, and
You have a lot more experience.
I don't even have a difficulty in believing it.
You've been in Arizona for 40 years. I mean, so you have so much more experience. I
Or
mean,
more than that, much
more
more.
than wow. Can I know?
So
Very nice. Wow. So
nearly 50 years.
wow. Very nice. Beautiful. So
So
you've had
so
to, we're just through. I've been doing this 13 years. Michael's been doing this for 5 years, but it's the last 2 years which it's so obvious. It's so obvious. That's why I think it has to be a Milchemes mitzvah, because if we don't win this, there's not going to be any more mitzvahs because we're not going to survive. I mean, it's so obvious.
Right. Now, it also happens that we live in a very unstable period of history, world history. The post-World War II order has collapsed. I refer to the order in which people such as myself grew up. The world was, you can't say at peace completely, but more at peace than it is at present. The world was more stable. There were wars, obviously. That seems to be embedded in human DNA. It doesn't seem to be a possibility for a world with human beings in it in which there will not be wars. But there were two large blocks, the American and NATO bloc, and there was the USSR and its allies, and there was a Cold War, and there was a kind of balance of power. You could say a balance of terror, but there was a balance. All of that has gone by the by. It no longer exists. And now we live in a pretty much what is called a multipolar world. We have Russia and we have China and we have the United States, which has allowed its industrial base to be frittered away over many, many years. Why? Because, see, you have to understand how we end up in this crazy world. One of the causes is as follows. The United States used to be a huge industrial power. Well, that is one of the reasons it could immediately, in World War II, particularly after Pearl Harbor, but even before, it was able to redirect its huge industrial base to producing jeeps and tanks and airplanes rather than cars and refrigerators. Or not only, because you had the industrial base. Now, usually what happened in war, like as happened in the First World War, Germany was defeated. It's an interesting story how that came about also, but that's the fact. Germany was defeated. And as was normal throughout history, the victors took the spoils, and the victors made the defeated suffer and pay. That's what happened. So the British and the French, there's no love lost between the British, French, and the Germans, as we all know, they decided to make them pay big time. That was the Versailles Treaty. And the Germans chafed, to put it mildly, under the terms of that agreement, having to pay massive reparations. Not unjust, but they considered it unjust. They didn't like it. And Hitler was able to ride that wave of indignation and nationalism and fan it into a huge conflagration. And that's how we ended up with the Second World War. So what did the Chochmologim, the wise men of the West, decide to do after the Second World War? They decided, well, that didn't work the way we handled it after the First World War. Let's try another approach. We'll be magnanimous to the defeated, the Japanese, the Germans. We will help them out. So we had the Marshall Plan, billions of dollars to rebuild from America to rebuild Germany. And we will offer them very preferential trade arrangements and agreements and tariffs or lack of tariffs. So they will be able to produce tons and tons of material goods in Germany and Japan, which is exactly what happened. And we will buy it from them. And so they will produce and we will buy and we'll make them rich and prosperous. And they'll be part of our system. And they'll have no reason to go to war. That was the idea. And it worked for a long time, has to be said. Now, what does that mean? That means that if there are no serious tariffs on foreign imports and the product is reasonably good and not too expensive, Americans would buy it. Americans like a good deal. If the car can be bought cheaper or a better car can be bought from Germany than from GM, then they'll do that. And that's no question that GM doesn't produce great cars, but Mercedes-Benz used to know how to do that. I'm not sure about today. So we'll buy those cars or whatever, or Toyota, which is probably the best car manufacturer on the planet at this point in time. Also one of the largest, also one of the best in terms of quality and reliability, etc. So we'll buy their stuff. They'll be happy. We'll be happy. Everyone's happy. We have a problem called the USSR. Well, we'll deal with that. We'll have a balance of terror, mutually assured destruction, and the world will go on its merry way. The problem with that is that America, therefore, lost any real interest or desire to have its own industrial base and productive capacity. So much of that which the United States used to build, create, they imported, and their local industries were shut down and lost. And that
Americans,
yeah.
Americans have become addicted to Chinese junk.
Right, exactly.
Cheap stuff, and they love it because it's cheap, and that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. Even the most basic, essential industries like shipbuilding. The United States can produce very few ships today. They just don't have the industrial base. Whereas the Chinese can produce 10 times more. So that explains to you why Trump, he didn't think this up by himself. He has many clever advisors. Decided that we have to raise tariffs against all these people because we have to wean Americans off their cheap products, some of which are junk and some of which are good.
Right.
And we have to, and that will incentivize American industrialists to rebuild the America's industrial base. That's the plan. That's the idea behind.
Sounds very nice. It sounds very nice in theory. How long is it going to take to bring manufacturing to American?
Years.
And assuming that Americans of certain ages wanted to be in an assembly line and a conveyor belt. I mean, he's assuming that. I don't know if that's.
Well, they're hoping that people will realize there's no choice, or something like that. That's apparently what they think. That's the plan. That's Trump's plan, because Trump and his advisors know that if America gets involved in a major war now, they'll be in very big trouble. In fact, it's very likely they would lose. Not in the first weeks or months, which they would be able to do well in. But beyond that, you need to have the industrial capacity to continue producing the war material, the ships and the planes and the what have you, and the missiles. And if you don't have that capacity, then once the war drags on for a time, you won't be able to sustain it. It'll be unsustainable. So, and Trump understands this, and that's why he's trying to avoid any major confrontation now in order for America to be able to build up for the future.
He's trying to squelch every war possible. He's trying to put out fires everywhere.
Right. And that affects us as well, unfortunately. But on the other hand, it has to be admitted that it's not necessarily always, even though it may seem to always be to our detriment, and often it is, but it's not always to our detriment, because if a major conflagration were to break out, it's impossible to know how that would affect us, maybe in a very negative way. So it's hard to know. Anyhow, many of these things are not in our hands. And but the world is unstable. The Chinese want to take over the world. Islam wants to take over the world. There's nothing new there. That's been the case for 1,400 years. And the Chinese also is not new. They've been doing that for thousands of years. They used to dominate all of Eastern Asia, and they believe that they should control the world. No question about it. So the world is a very unstable place, and therefore I expect, without being able to describe with precision how things will work out, how things will play out, I expect all kinds of upheavals in the world. which will inevitably affect us as well, but not just us. And when things explode, you don't know where the pieces will fall. And I therefore cannot possibly predict how things will work out. And here we have to rely on two things, on our own mettle and our intelligence and our ingenuity, of which we have lots, Baruch Hashem, in spades, and on Hashem, very much so. So I fully expect that we will see in the coming years great upheavals in the world. And it will require the very best of Jewish leadership to navigate our ship through such rough seas. And I don't know if at this time we have that kind of leadership in place, but there again, we can only do what we can do and explain what we're able to explain and understand. And we have to base our thinking, our planning, and our vision on the Torah and not on anything else of foreign provenance.
Well, just to conclude, Rabbi Bar-Hayim, just to conclude, I wanted to thank you for your words of courage and wisdom and encouragement to me and for so many of us here in Israel. And I hold you in the highest regard as one of those Jewish leaders.
You know what they say, flattery will get you everywhere, but that's not true, actually. I'm more or less immune, I think, Baruch Hashem, to yeah, flattery, even if it's undeserved, as it is in this case. And I'm only speaking what I perceive to be true. I can only tell you, and I thank you for your kind words, but I can tell you that over the years, well, another reason that I'm able to remain sane in a completely insane environment is the fact that time and again, the reality has proved me to be correct. In other words, it strengthened in me the realization that I'm not crazy, that what I thought all along is exactly what will happen. I remember in those same years that I described, or talking about 40 years ago, I remember the defense minister at that time was Moshe Arens, for example, and he said, well, the Arabs are throwing rocks and petrol bombs, as if petrol bombs are a Kleinigkeit, something that's not serious, but if they begin to use firearms, then they know what our response will be. So I said to myself, yeah, sure, I know and they know. In other words, nothing, and that's what happened. And many Jews, right-wing Jews in this country, in Taushin Mem Aleph, Mem Beth, 81, 82, were opposed to the Camp David Accords. Before that as well, the Camp David Accords were signed in, what was it, 78, 79, Minyanam. And many people predicted what the outcome would be, and here we've seen the outcome, and many predicted what the outcome of Oslo would be. And we were told by all these great experts, these very, very great sages and know-alls, that we don't understand the world, and they do. And what we need to do is strive for peace, peace now, land for peace, all this stuff, all this kind of drivel, and things will be much better, as you shall see. And then we were told the same with Sharon's criminal policy against the Jewish people in Gaza. And we were told that this will only increase our security. Okay, well, we know how that worked out, and so it goes. It's always the people who made these statements and who warned of what was to come haven't shown to be correct time and again. If I speak about myself or the more narrow, limited world of Torah and Torah perspectives and understandings of reality, there too, I think I understood both the Haredi world and the Dati Leumi world decades ago, how they think, how they view things, and it's what I predicted and the way I read them is correct, and they have no responses, no answers to anything, either of them. They don't. Not really. At least the vast majority in the Haredi world, clearly not, because they're living in another world altogether, in a different dimension. So, as you said, they're relying on things falling from the sky and whatever it might be. They have no response to anything. And they don't consider it to be their business to have a response or an answer. So they're, as it were, patur. They're exempt. They have no responsibility. This whole business of a Jewish state was your idea. You figure it out. That's basically what they think. This is not. I'm not putting words in their mouth, by the way. In the first Knesset, the first parliament in this country, after Israel was founded, I don't remember his name offhand. You can look this up. The head or one of the heads of Agudat Yisrael at that time, which, if I'm not mistaken, at that time received many seats. I don't remember how many seats, but quite a number of seats in the Knesset. When asked what is your foreign policy, what do you think on foreign policy issues? And he said quite openly, he said, we don't have a foreign policy. That was his response in so many words. We do not have a foreign policy, and that makes a lot of sense. If you believe that the idea of establishing a Jewish state was some aberration of these crazy Zionists, these kufrim, I'm not denying that many of them were kufrim. I'm just saying that these apostate Zionists came up with this silly notion of a Jewish state. It wasn't our idea, and had you asked us, we would have said, don't do it. And by the way, that's exactly what Hagaon Harav Avigdor Nebenzahl said to me in a private conversation about 35, 36 years ago in his home in the Atika in Yerushalayim. He said to me, if he, in his words, he said, had Ben Gurion asked Gdolei Israel, that's how he worded it. I'm not saying I know who those people are. I'm not sure that he knows who they are either, but all right, that's what he said. I respect Rabbi Avigdor Nebenzahl very, very much, although I don't agree with everything he says. He said to me, had Ben Gurion consulted Gdolei Israel, should I establish a state now, yes or no? And he said, I'm convinced they would have said no. And I'm convinced that he's right. They would have said no. They would have said, who needs this? What a crazy notion is that? We're waiting for Mashiach. In the meantime, the British can run this place or whatever. That's fine. What's wrong with the British mandate? It's okay. Or something along those lines. So if that's your attitude, and now you went ahead and did this thing, you set up this country, and now you want to know what our foreign policy is. We didn't have one. It was your idea. You figure it out. You caused the problem. You deal with it. We don't know anything about this. It's not in our Masorah. It's not part of our tradition. We don't know what to do with such a situation. It wasn't in our playbook at all. So that's the Haredi view. The Dati Leumi view, the religious Zionist view, the problem there is of a different order altogether, different type altogether. They have been willing historically for the past 120 plus years, 124 years, 123 years since the Mizrahi was established, that they've been willing to accept that they joined the Zionist movement, the Histadrut HaTzionit, the Zionist Federation or movement or whatever. They joined it as a small religious faction. They were in the minority. That's a fact. They couldn't change that. But they decided to join this organization, something Rav Kook was not in favor of doing, but they were. The fact that they claim that he is their ideological father is
fiction.
It's not accurate. They adopted him as their ideological or spiritual father, but it's not historically accurate at all. And they came to see themselves as like a spare tire in a car. You have the car, you have the engine, you have the passengers, the driver. You have a spare tire as well, which you use sometimes in an emergency, but that's it. The spare tire certainly doesn't decide where you drive, where you go, and who's going to be the driver. And so they began to see themselves as these useful idiots, this cannon fodder that will most definitely there are positive things one can say about religious Zionism. There's no question. Certain aspects of Torah were rekindled and redefined correctly by religious Zionists, but it was done in a very lopsided and incorrect fashion with too little input from true Gedolei Torah and too much input from these religious kibbutznikim who didn't always know what they were doing. So we put it that way, mildly. And And the outcome is this golden calf. In other words, the outcome is this is what we see today, which whereby the religious Zionist world are very they lack vision, and they also lack first of all, the internal self-confidence that we should be the leaders, and we know we wouldn't, and if we had the opportunity, we would know where to go, where to lead, towards what aims and goals to move, and to move the nation. They don't really believe that, and they've begun to see too many things through non-Torah Chiloni spectacles, and that's their undoing. And until that is changed, we're in for a rough ride with the likes of Netanyahu at the helm.
Thank you, Bar-Hayim. I'm going to have
Sure,
to
you have to go.
Thank you very much for your words. I hope to continue this.
You
Thank
It's
you.
my pleasure as always.
Amen.
Shalom.
Thank you. Shalom.